Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to my next team preview video. Today we are going to be doing the Minnesota Vikings. For if this is your first time watching these videos, I'll give you a quick rundown what you can expect. I'm gonna quickly give you my thoughts on their coach Mike Zimmer. I'm gonna look at the remaining cap space, see if they can work with anything prior to the season. Look at their offense, look at their defense, give my overall feeling at the team at the end of the episode, and then I also give this kind of a fantasy football perspective as I go through, mainly on the offense, kind of give you an idea if I would draft this defense to stream week one. And yeah, that's what you can expect out of this video. Obviously, thank you to those that have watched the previous videos. You know how these things turn out. So let's just go ahead and dive into today's video. Starting in with Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer has been a longtime head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. Basically, he's done everything you could ask out of him as a coach. He's won the division. He's reached the NFC championship. But now he's been there long enough where I think the team is just ready. The organization is just ready to see if he can finally take them over the hump. Obviously, they have not cracked the Super Bowl. They've gone as far as you can get prior to the Super Bowl, but nothing past that. And then we've kind of seen some inconsistent years. Seems like every other year they're either floundering or being in the middle of the pack because they're losing a lot of close games, or they're really having a really strong year. They're making the playoffs, but then they end up losing either in the divisional round or that conference championship game. But we might see something different this year because they got a pretty stacked team, at least a team that should be able to push for the playoffs. And if everybody's healthy, and Kirk Cousins with his streaky self can get hot in the playoffs, you never know. This is definitely a team that could sneak, a dark horse team that could definitely sneak into the Super Bowl. I will say this though, it definitely does seem it's like at least a deep playoff run or bust for Zimmer. I could see them possibly moving on from Zimmer if this year does go if they fall flat in their face and they miss the playoffs. This might be a time to blow everything up in Minnesota and start to rebuild. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get into this. Taking a look at the remaining cap space. As of right now, not right now, but as of last night when I pulled this from overthecap.com, the Vikings are currently sitting at $13.4 million. So they got a little room to work with if they wanted to maybe go sign anybody else. But if you look at these notable notable players that have been on the team over the last few years that are entering a contract year, obviously their longtime safety, all pro safety, Harrison Smith is entering the last year of his contract. He's getting up there in age. Anthony Barr is entering the last year of his contract with the team. And then Brian O'Neill, their tackle they selected in the draft, their right tackle, about 3 or 4 years ago, he's entering the last year of his contract, and he definitely has outperformed his draft position. So all three of those guys are somebody that they may want to consider. Obviously, if they want to maybe make sure Harrison Smith retires as a Viking, that's one. I could see them maybe moving on from Anthony Barr. They definitely were close to a couple years ago before they brought him back after he originally committed to the Jets. And then Brian O'Neill, that one definitely seems like the one they would definitely want to lock down. They've had issues with their offensive line over the last few years, but he has not been the problem. So you think they would at least lock up the guy they for sure have found as a hit this, in the draft process, because you don't know how these other young guys are going to turn out that they've drafted over these last two draft classes. So, I mean, they got a little bit of room where if they wanted to maybe kind of front load, maybe give a pay raise this year, they could. And then maybe they can figure it out the other years later on, because I know they're going to be dealing with Kirk Cousins' big cap hit after this year on the last year of his deal. So, I mean, I could see all three of them maybe working out something. If I was the GM, I'm definitely considering Harrison Smith because it's just everything he's done for the organization. Seems like I wouldn't mind him retiring as a Viking, and he's always been a consistent player. What hasn't been like his play has dropped off. And then Brian O'Neill, just because you want a good offensive line. But yeah, let's just go ahead and get into this then. This is the offensive preview. Now, these projected starters, they are pulled from the Prospect Encyclopedia. And this is actually the first time this is not from anybody else. This is actually, I wrote the Vikings section in the Prospect Encyclopedia. So these are per me. And if anybody is not watching any of my other videos, if you see a star next to any of these names on the projected starters or over there on the notable backups, that means they made the Prospect Encyclopedia list. Basically, the Vikings have a top 22 prospect list, which is 22 players from the last three draft classes that have less than 12 career regular season starts. So these are guys that are still gaining meaningful NFL starting experience, whether they're incoming star rookies, upcoming role players, or strong like special team core guys. I'm gonna go ahead and get into this and take a look at their offense. I'm gonna start with the quarterback position. Let's start with the much debated Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, to me, he's just a very solid quarterback. You know, he can keep the team within games with his arm. They definitely can want to be in a shootout, especially now they got, you know, Justin Jefferson would replace Stephon Diggs easily in his not easily, but he showed up in his rookie year. And then they still got Adam Thielen, and they got Irv Smith Jr. as well in their passing attack. Tyler Conklin, we'll see how he emerges. And then they brought in D.D. Westbrook, and they got a number of other guys too. But in terms of Kirk, here's some stats on him. For those that don't know, I pull stats from since 2018 as far as, you know, who's been the most productive players over the last 3 years. Now here's one that's actually actively going. I found this summer. Kirk has actually got the third longest active streak of having at least one touchdown in a game. He's currently sitting at 14 games in a row where he's had a touchdown. And then these are stats since 2018 among quarterbacks. He's got the second best completion percentage. He's got the fifth most passing touchdowns. He's got the seventh best passer rating, and he's got the ninth most passing yards. So Kirk's definitely been productive in terms of being, you know, in terms of like being a top 10 quarterback over the last few years. Now, obviously, he has his downfalls where he has his games where he's not looking as great. He kind of turns the ball over. He's definitely a streaky quarterback. You know, when he's on, he's on. He can be difficult to stop. But then if you can get some pressure on him and force him to scramble, that's when his decision making tends to drop. So, you know, I'm expecting a strong year out of Kirk. You know, he's always been at least, you know, what he is. He's never been like too below what he is or too high above what he is. He's definitely kind of one of those bipolar quarterbacks when it comes to his play on the field. In terms of fantasy, you know, I'm not actively trying to draft Kirk Cousins. I've kind of said this on other episodes. If I'm drafting maybe, I don't know, if I'm drafting a Trevor Lawrence, if I'm drafting maybe I want to wait on Trey Lance or a Justin Fields this year, or even like a Joe Burrow, if you want to wait and see how he reacts to that knee at the beginning of the season. You know, Kirk Cousins is one of those veteran quarterbacks you could draft, try to count on for like, you know, the month of September, and then maybe you're hoping one of the younger guys that are sitting on your bench blows up and they get comfortable in the NFL and you're ready to kind of make that switch from Kirk to the young guy. But who knows, maybe Kirk balls out all year for you and he's your starting quarterback all year. But I definitely think he's worth like a starting spot at least at the beginning of the season. But I don't know, again, he's a streaky quarterback, so you maybe want to find somebody else. But I could understand that anybody that would take a chance on Cousins just because he has produced. I mean, he's got the fifth most passing touchdowns since 2018, so it's not like he's been a bum over the last 3 years since he's joined the Vikings. Now, if anything were to happen to him, they're going to be counting on a rookie, Kellen Mond. That's when you kind of get worried about your skill position players. And, you know, Kellen Mond's got the tools, but, you know, obviously you don't know how he's going to translate into the NFL. And then moving on to the running back position, Dalvin Cook. Dalvin's been one of the best running backs over the last 3 years. He completely balled out last year, having a career year. I'm a huge Dalvin fan. He can do anything with the ball in his hands. He's got his burst and agility out in the open field is amazing. He can outrun cornerbacks, safeties. He can, you know, he's not afraid to truck stick somebody if he needs to, and he just gets the job done anytime he has the ball in his hands. And then we got to see what he could with him having a career year last year. We got a chance to see what he can do when he is fully healthy and doesn't have to deal with any type of ticky-tack injuries. Now, here's a lot of stats I found this summer on Dalvin Cook. Let's just go ahead and run down these. Dalvin Cook is one of 5 players to have a season of 1,700 plus scrimmage yards and 15 plus touchdowns. He's one of 9 running backs that have averaged 50 plus rushing yards per game and 25 plus receiving yards per game. He's currently has the second longest active streak of having at least 50 rushing yards in a game, sitting at 14. And he's also, and then these stats are cumulative, you know, among running backs, and some of these are among like all skills position players, of course. But he's got the second most rushing yards per game, 4th most rushing yards, 4th most fantasy football points per game, 5th most scrimmage yards, 5th most receiving yards per game, fifth most rushing yards touchdown. I'm sorry, fifth most rushing touchdowns, seventh most rushing yards per reception, seventh most total touchdowns, tied for the seventh most rushing yards per attempt, eighth most receiving yards, and eighth most receptions. The guy is a complete stud. That it makes sense why he's going in the top 3 in fantasy football. And if I'm on the board in those top 3 picks, I'm not going to hesitate to pick him. Like, to me, if you have pick number 1 or 2, I'm completely fine drafting either Christian McCaffrey or Dalvin Cook. He's a stud. And then if you do get him, I always advise with Dalvin just because he's had those injuries pop up here and there. Definitely draft Alexander Madison as his handcuff. He's a very solid backup, and I'm kind of interested to see how the rookie Kene Nwangwu, if he's able to make, if I said that name right, if he's able to get some snaps this year. But I still think Alexander Madison will be the one of the top handcuffs to own this year again in fantasy football, and that way you have him if anything were to happen to Dalvin at any point this season. Now, moving on to their wide receivers, they are arguably got one of the better wide receiver tandems in the league with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. Adam Thielen, even though he's kind of getting up there in age, he's still effective with his route running ability and his ability to find the end zone. And he's got that chemistry with Kirk Cousins. He's definitely like more of a I say now at this point of his career, he's more of that wide receiver 2 or 3 range, a guy that is going to get peppered with targets because there's not a lot of guys competing for his targets in that passing attack, and he's just a guy you're comfortable to own because you're going to get out of Adam. He's never going to see, he's never going to be a letdown. If he has a letdown week for you in fantasy, it's just because the game plan and the day did not go his way. And then Justin Jefferson really came on as a rookie last year after he had a quiet first 2 games, and then in his 3rd game he blew up, and then he basically took the league by a storm for the rest of the year. And even though Justin has only played 1 season in the NFL, he still popped up on my list a couple times when I was pulling stats since 2018, just because of his average numbers per game. So let's take a look at him really quick. Justin Jefferson since 2018, he's got the 5th most receiving yards per game. So last year he was averaging 87.5 yards per game. And that's with having those quiet first 2 games. So that's actually a really good stat when you think about that. And then he's also got the 8th most fantasy football points per game, sitting at 17.1. Kid's an absolute stud. I think he's going to continue his growth in year 2. Honestly, I think at this point, if you ask me, Cody, who do you want to draft between Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson? It's going to be Justin Jefferson because I think he has, at this point now, he showed it last year, he definitely has a higher ceiling as a player than Adam Thielen. Because of his route running ability, it doesn't matter where he's on the field, and he's got the speed to make explosive chunk plays throughout the game. So I'm definitely high on Justin Jefferson. Because they're kind of in like more of they would like to run as much as they can with Dalvin. I don't think he's a wide receiver 1 quite yet, but he's a wide receiver 2 to me that can give you wide receiver 1 numbers on any given week. And then they brought in D.D. Westbrook from the Jaguars. He's got the speed. I'm kind of interested to see how his speed translates on that Minnesota field and in that dome. Because he's got electric speed. He was on the grass down there in Jacksonville over his first few years. Now he's going to be kind of on that kind of like what do you call it, AstroTurf or whatever. So I think that's going to actually help him generate more speed as he gets later in his routes. So I think he can help stretch out the field for the offense, and that's going to open up rushing lanes for guys like Dalvin Cook, and it's going to open up things for Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen. And they got some decent backups. They got Chad Beebe. I still listed my man Olabisi Johnson there that made the prospect encyclopedia, but unfortunately he suffered a torn ACL last week, so he is done for the year. I'm interested to see their rookie Irv Smith Jr, see how he plays this year. He's got some good speed to him. And then KJ Osborne, I put him on there just because a lot of the players are talking him up, that he's having a great camp. His name, anytime I've listened to anything about the Vikings or read anything about the Vikings, I keep on seeing KJ Osborne's name. So we'll see if he emerges at all out of Minnesota. And then let's take a look at their tight ends. Obviously, they moved on from Kyle Rudolph. He went over to New York. And now Irv Smith Jr., their 2nd-round pick, is entering year 3. I've always been a good a believer in Irv Smith. I think he's got the talent. He's flashed some great things over his first couple years, and now he's kind of he has the opportunity to be that lead guy in the tight end room. And if he can find he's a guy where, I think he's worth a late round dart throw in fantasy, just because if he can see a significant amount of targets every week, I think he can be a sneaky fantasy play. He's more of a tight end 2 right now. You want to see if he can work himself into a tight end 1 role. And then, like I mentioned too, this is more of a run heavy offense. They still got Thielen, they got Jefferson. They're going to get Dalvin Cook as many touches as he can. So my biggest concern with Irv Smith is not only like he's going to see an inconsistent target load between every other week, but we also saw the emergence of their other tight end, Tyler Conklin, last year. So he's going to be getting used in double tight end sets. So, you got to like what this Vikings got between their skill position players. Dalvin. I like Madison. We'll see how the rookie back does. Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, Irv Smith, and Tyler Conklin Jr. Now, this offense, last year was one of the more explosive offenses, one of the better offenses in the league, which is weird because in Minnesota underneath Mike Zimmer, it's always been the defense that carried them and the offense that let them down. But last year, it was the offense that carried them, despite the poor offensive line play. That's kind of what hampered them and caused them to miss the playoffs at the end of the last year. But it wasn't like they did not at least go attempt to add some pieces. They drafted Christian Darrisaw, they drafted Wyatt Davis, and they got Ezra Cleveland from last year. And then they obviously, I already talked about Brian O'Neill, and then they're looking for Garrett Bradbury to kind of take that next step as a player, as he's been in the league. This will be his 4th year, I believe. So, they have Darrisaw's a 1st-round pick, Ezra Cleveland's a 2nd-round pick, Garrett Bradley's a 1st-round pick, Wyatt Davis, I believe, was a 3rd-round pick this year, and then Brian O'Neill was a 2nd-round pick. So you're talking about they got day 1 and day 3 guys across that whole offensive line. So if all 3 of those guys, all 5 of those guys can mold together and gel well with each other and reach their talent level, this should be a much improved offensive line. But then you also got to have the concerns that maybe this line is too young and a veteran defensive front could beat them up and give them problems too throughout the season. So this offense will be definitely totally on the offensive line, and then of course you can point to Kirk Cousins to continue to have a strong year like he did last year. So overall, they got the pieces to move the ball on the ground. They got the pieces to move the ball through the air. And as long as their offensive line is adequate, this is a making of another top 10 offense again this year. And I don't see why it would not be, despite, now obviously if you start to lose guys because of injuries, that will hold them back. That's going to hold most teams back if they lose guys because of injuries. But other than that, as long as they're healthy and that line can come together early in the season, you're going to see one of the stronger offenses definitely in the NFC. Now I'm going to keep it moving to the defensive preview. For the Vikings, we got their starting defense. I'll take a look at their defensive front. Last year, their defensive front was one of the worst in the NFL, mainly because Danielle Hunter missed the entire season because of a neck injury. And let's just start with him. It's good. Him be returning to this defense is going to make a difference on their ability to get after the quarterback and then also be able to stop the run. Danielle Hunter, this is how good this guy's been. He missed all of last year, but even though he missed all of 2020, since 2018, he's the only player with 2 seasons of at least 67 plus tackles, 13 plus tackles for a loss, 16 plus quarterback hits, and 9 plus sacks. And even though he missed last year, he's tied for the 7th most tackles for a loss at 36. So the guy's an absolute stud. So they're getting him back. He's like a guy that he's got the talent to win a Defensive Player of the Year award. And then you got to add in Michael Pierce, who they signed last year, but he opted out because of the pandemic. So they're getting Michael Pierce back as well. They signed Dalvin Tomlinson. That's one of the more underrated signings in free agency this past year. Michael Pearson, Dalvin Tomlinson is going to eat up a lot of space in the middle of the defensive front. And then you got, as of right now, I have Stephen Weatherly as their projected opposite defensive starter, opposite of Hunter. And if he doesn't come through, they got draft picks invested in DJ Woldham, who flashed some good things. Patrick Jones and Janarius Robinson from this past draft. So they got guys they can work in the rotation to try to get consistent pressure off the edge opposite of Hunter. And then on top of that, if anything happens to those D tackles I mentioned, they signed Sheldon Richardson. They brought him back. And they also got a guy like James Lynch who I like. So I mean, they went from having one of the worst defensive fronts last year to having a very not only strong defensive front, but they have more depth this year. So they should be able to handle if any of these guys got to miss any time because of injuries. Now, their linebacker group should get better too because they're going to get Anthony Barr. Anthony Barr went down at some point last year to miss the entire season. So his return is going to help, and he can help create pressure with his pass rushing ability, and they can use him in a variety of different packages. Eric Kendricks is one of the best linebackers in the league, especially with his ability in coverage. And then they drafted Chaz Surratt. We'll see if he can compete and win that job. I would not be surprised if Troy Dye battles it out with him. I give the edge to Chaz Surratt in my projections as far as starters, but it's one of the stronger linebacker groups in the league. And as long as all those guys can stay healthy and Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson are in front of him, that's going to make life easy on guys like Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr to kind of flow all over the field and make plays for this Vikings defense. And then obviously everybody knows Mike Zimmer loves his cornerbacks, loves coaching up the secondary. And I'm sure last year he was so upset that they got not only picked apart on the ground, but they got picked apart in the air. And that's why you're seeing like all these moves, because Mike Zimmer's done having a bad defense. And you see that. Look at their secondary so I can finish this off really quick. They brought in Patrick Peterson. Now, Peterson is definitely on the back end of his career, but maybe a change of scenery up there in Minnesota can have a late career resurgence, and Patrick Peterson could put on a strong performance this year and maybe show us some of the Patrick Peterson that we saw throughout his career. And then they also brought back Mackenzie Alexander. He was on the team, but then he went to Cincinnati. Now he's back to be their nickel cornerback. They also signed Rashad Breeland from the Chiefs, who is a very solid cornerback for Kansas City over the last couple of years. A guy I'm excited about is Cameron Dantzler. I think he's going to beat out Rashad Breeland for a starting role. I was a big fan of him in the draft process last year, and I think he's got all the makings of a very solid NFL cornerback. And then they got guys like Harrison Hand, and then if you look at their safety group, I already talked up Harrison Smith. He's an all-pro safety, a veteran safety, been there for a long time. He's actually tied for the fourth most interceptions since 2018. He's got 11 since then. And they brought in Xavier Woods from the Cowboys, who's he's a solid safety. So, I mean, this has got a making where if everybody can stay on the field throughout the year, this team could easily climb back up into that top 10 status as a defense underneath Mike Zimmer. So I have high expectations for them to. That's my preview for the offense and defense. So let's just go overall. I have high expectations for the Vikings. I really do. It's Mike Zimmer's prove it year. He's either got to go on a deep playoff run, if not at least reach the Super Bowl, I think, to keep his job for next year. And then you look at their offense. They're returning everybody as far as quarterback and skill position players from last year. That was a top 10 offensive unit. They added Christian Darrisaw and Wyatt Davis. I think their line should be a lot better than it was last year. So as long as that unit stays together throughout the year, they're going to be able to put up points and be in shootouts and, do whatever it takes, to keep up with the guys like the Packers, the Bucks, and the NFC. And then last year, the biggest thing that held them back was their defense. And what did they get back? They got back Danielle Hunter. They added Dalvin Tomlinson. Michael Pierce comes back from opting out. They're getting Anthony Barr back. Eric Kendricks is still there. They brought in Patrick Peterson. They got the man Harrison Smith. They got Rashad Breeland. I think Cameron Dantzler is going to have a very strong year. So to me, they got the makings of a top 10 offense. They got the makings of a top 10 defense. This is a team that can not only overtake the Packers to win the division, but if we could see a hot Kirk Cousins in the playoffs, you could see him go on. You could see him carrying the Vikings like Joe Flacco did for the Ravens about a decade ago at this point, if I'm remembering that right. So yeah, I think this is a playoff or bust team, whether it's they make it in as a wild card or they win the division. And then I do believe this is a team that I think they want to make it to the Super Bowl finally underneath Mike Zimmer. And if that doesn't happen, I could see them moving on from Mike and completely blowing up this roster and restarting and rebuilding everything. So this is a big year for this Minnesota franchise to get things done and finally win that elusive Super Bowl that they have never won. It's one of the better teams that they have had in the recent years. So I'm excited to see what they do, what they bring. But yeah, that's my preview video. As always, for people that watch my previous videos, you know I always slip up and I don't talk about if I would draft the Minnesota defense for week one. Week one, they do have the Cincinnati Bengals. I just realized I forgot to talk about that. I've done my Bengals preview. You can go back and watch that one. I kind of excited about this Bengals offense this year. But with that being said, they still got an offensive line they're trying to figure out. It sounds like Joe Burrow's, still trying to shake off the rust coming off his injury. And as I just talked up their defense, I can definitely understand if you wanted to draft the Vikings defense to stream them against the Bengals in week one. I would probably look elsewhere because I kind of like that Bengals offense. But if other options were to go down, I definitely would consider drafting the Minnesota Vikings defense to stream them week one against the Bengals. But yeah, other than that, that is my video today on the Vikings. I do want to thank you for tuning in and watching this video today. If you've watched all my other previous videos, thank you so much for that. Please like this video if you liked it today. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't. Go tell a friend to subscribe to my channel. I know I'm going to keep on pushing this at the end of my videos. It's my goal to get to 100 subscribers by the time the NFL season kicks off. I would love to build this channel and continue to grow this thing and provide you guys content. And then as I grow this thing, I want to be able to upgrade my equipment. I want to be able to upgrade the videos for you guys and do a lot of a better job in providing you more entertainment and better content for you guys to consume from me. But I do appreciate everybody's support. The next team I will be doing will be the New England Patriots, so stay tuned for that. I will be knocking that out tomorrow. At some point. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and get going with my day. I got a real life to take care of too. So I appreciate your guys' support. I'll talk to you later during the Patriots video.